Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh dan selamat tengah hari semua. Terima kasih kerana bersama-sama dalam siri CADe-Lead Cafe series kali ini. Siri cafe ini sebagaimana yang semua maklum adalah khas untuk kita memperkasakan pemahaman dan amalan outcome based education OBE dalam kalangan pensyarah dengan memberi ruang kepada perkongsian idea, refleksi dan pengalaman secara santai tetapi bermakna. Dan hari ini sambil kita bayangkan ada ChocOBErry Smoothie kat tangan. Ni ChocOBErry Smoothie tapi saya dah air putih je sebenarnya. Kita santai-santai berbicara tentang satu topik penting dalam dunia pendidikan, dalam pengajaran dan pelajaran kita, iaitu berkenaan dengan constructive alignment ataupun penjajaran konstruktif. Constructive alignment ini sebenarnya adalah asas kepada OBE. Ia penting bagi memastikan hasil pembelajaran, aktiviti pengajaran dan juga penilaian kita semua adalah selari. Dan apabila selari, barulah pembelajaran menjadi bermakna. Dan saya rasa topik ini adalah sangat bertetapan, sangat sesuai, bertepatan dengan masa sekarang ini, iaitu kerana saya pasti rakan-rakan pensyarah semua sekarang sedang sibuk memikirkan, sibuk merancang aktiviti pengajaran dan penilaian untuk kursus semester yang akan datang, yang akan bermula pada 2-3 minggu lagi. Nak isi rancangan pengajaran, nak isi course assessment plan dan sebagainya. Dan Alhamdulillah hari ini untuk membimbing perbincangan kita, kita bertuah kerana Profesor Dr. Muhamad Saiful Bahri dapat bersama-sama kita untuk berkongsi tentang topik ini. Saya pasti ramai yang ingin berkenalan dengan Prof Saiful. Ya, Prof Saiful. Beliau sebenarnya baru sahaja join UPM pada tahun ini. Ya, sebelum ini beliau merupakan pensyarah di USM dan juga sebenarnya mantan pengarah kepada Center for CADe Development of Academic Excellence, CDAE, macam lebih kurang macam CADe-Lead kita CADe-Lead kita di UPM. Prof Dr. Muhammad Saiful Bahri merupakan profesor dalam bidang pendidikan perubatan di Fakulti Perubatan dan Sains Kesihatan UPM. Saya bacakan sedikit biografi Prof Saiful nak memperkenalkan beliau ni. Beliau merupakan pakar yang diiktiraf dalam pembangunan kurikulum, penilaian, pengajaran dan pembelajaran serta jaminan kualiti pendidikan. Prof Saiful juga pernah menjadi Editor-in-Chief Education in Medicine Journal lebih 15 tahun dan kini berkhidmat sebagai Deputy Editor-in-Chief, President Editor-in-Chief of that journal lah. Beliau merupakan Presiden Persatuan Pendidikan Perubatan dan Sains Kesihatan Malaysia, penasihat khas kepada ASEAN University Network dan juga penilai program untuk MQA serta ASEAN University Network QA. Beliau sering dijemput sebagai penceramah di peringkat nasional dan antarabangsa. Kalau siapa-siapa yang follow Prof Saiful di Facebook, saya follow beliau, saya sering lihat perkongsian aktiviti beliau di sana. Saban minggu, saban bulan ada sahaja bengkel ataupun latihan yang Prof Saiful terlibat sebagai penceramah ataupun jurulatih. So jadi saya terinspirasilah dengan kesuhuran beliau dalam bidang ini. Minta maaf, saya dah nak mula hilang suara ni sebenarnya. Saya kurang sihat. Dan dalam bidang penyelidikan, beliau sangat masyhur dalam bidangnya iaitu medical education. Citationnya melebihi 10,000 di Google Scholars dan baru ini tersenarai again dalam World Tops 2 Scientist oleh Stanford University. Pada 2024 dan iaitu sejak 2022. So, without any further ado, so saya dengan sukacitanya menjemput Profesor Dr. Muhammad Saiful Bahri untuk menyampaikan perkongsian beliau. Prof, the floor is yours.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and selamat tengah hari semua. Yang pertamanya terima kasih kepada CADe-Lead di atas peluang yang diberikan, dan saya juga nak ambil peluang ni selamat berkenalan dengan rakan-rakan baru semua ya. Dan izinkan saya nak berkongsi sedikit sebanyak tentang topik yang diberikan kepada saya, making sense of constructive alignment. Sekejap ya, saya ada sedia slide sudah ya ni. Kejap dah. Alright. Okay, so boleh nampak ke slide saya ni?
Boleh, boleh.
Suara saya jelas tak?
Saya jelas.
Okay. Alright, so untuk permulaan ni mungkin saya just bagilah sikit apa yang saya nak sampaikan. Saya ada beberapa perkara saja yang saya nak kongsikan pada tengah hari ini. Satu berkaitan dengan konsep constructive alignment dan juga mungkin perbandingan dengan apa yang dinyatakan di peringkat global berkaitan dengan constructive alignment ni. Kita juga nak tengok macam mana constructive alignment ni dijalankan jugalah di peringkat kita dan juga di peringkat luar daripada kita. Alright. Dan mungkin kita cuba reflect juga berkaitan dengan constructive alignment ni adalah konteks student-centered learning. Okay. Pembelajaran berpusatkan pelajar. Alright. So ini tiga perkara yang saya akan kaitkan. Mungkin sebelum saya pergi lebih jauh, mungkin saya nak tahu berapa ramai yang familiar dengan constructive alignment. Boleh scan aja QR code ataupun masukkan passcode yang diberikan tu dalam slido.com dan masukkan nombor dan cuba tengok new term, sound familiar. Maybe if you are familiar and can explain it, practice it and can give an example. I think maybe I will give you about 2 or 3 minutes. Try to reflect and try to respond so that I have an idea about how many of you actually at what level, you know? I mean that is it new term, is it you are getting familiar with it already, maybe beyond that familiarity, which is you can explain and even can give example if let's say you are allowed to give and to talk about it later on. Alright, so far sounds familiar. The most? Okay. Alright, so kita ada 10 orang. Alright. So anyone else? Okay. Familiar and can explain it. Ada 8%. Okay, that's great. Maybe later on you can share your, what you are familiar with later on. Okay, any more response? Jangan malu-malu Ini anonymous, tak ada capture nama dan sebagainya, don't worry. Okay. Alright. Ada lagi? Ada seminit lagi? Okay. Okay, ada 30 saat lagi untuk anda respon kepada pool ni. Alright, so terima kasih kepada yang respon walaupun 16 orang aja, tapi secara umumnya anda familiar lah benda ni kan, dan mungkin ada yang even can explain if you are given chance to explain later on. Alright, so so far sama ada tak nak mengaku pun macam mana, tak ada yang practice lagi, tapi saya percaya ada yang dah practice yang even boleh bagi contoh pun dalam dia punya amalan berkaitan dengan constructive alignment. Alright, okay, thank you so much. Now, these are two main documents that I referred whenever I'm going to discuss about constructive alignment. And then I believe that the founder of the constructive alignment is John Biggs. Alright, so these are the earliest paper that he published, and then later on, let's see how people thinks and how people views about constructive alignment in practice. All right, so I'm going to explore both, and you can access this to, I would say, highly cited papers when it comes to constructive alignment. I think if you have time, you can read. But now I'm going to give you just a glance through what was being discussed in these two papers in relation to constructive alignment. All right, so I'm giving this table, and the aspect that I'm going to give more information after this about what is the concept and what are the roles of learners in these two views, how that will help in the curriculum design, and how that relate with teaching, learning activities, assessment, and I will highlight a little bit strength about constructive alignment, and then what are the limitations or maybe critiques related to constructive alignment, and hopefully what is the overall message, right? So now, if you're looking at the initial, at the initial stage of constructive alignment, so Biggs mentioned about this element. It means that the constructive alignment is basically the integration of constructivist learning theory. In the simple word, students construct their own meaning. That is a simple word, right? It means that the students will be allowed to construct their own meaning through the activities that we plan for them based on the outcomes. But in the Biggs, I think Biggs put it as objectives. But once it comes later, we put it as outcome because it's more towards student-centered learning terms when it comes to the outcomes, right? And then it's also the combination of instructional alignment. So instructional alignment, it means that the outcomes, the teaching and learning activities, and then the assessments are all well aligned. That I mean by instructional alignment. And this element make a constructive alignment. So it means that when we make sure that the outcomes, the teaching learnings, activities and assessment align, but the ultimate aim is basically for allowing the student to construct their meaning, because we believe that when the student construct their own meaning, that is where learning occurs. Right? So this is something that constructive alignment's ultimate aim, to allow student learning through developing their own meaning. So this is I think the foundation concept of constructive alignment with a very good purpose. But let's see what the current practice. The current practice that was summarized by one of the paper, the login papers in 2021. Yes, based on the current practice, yes, constructive alignment is very influential. There is no doubt about that. That's why, we can see in our own practice, constructive alignment is being embedded, especially when it comes to outcome-based education. Because the outcome-based, the main aim is the outcomes, what the student able to do at the end of either a lesson, a course, or maybe a program. So what the student can do at the end after they are going through the teaching learning process. However, I think this is more from the author perspective. The constructive alignment has been either oversimplified or misapplied. All right, so that's why the authors argue that we need to come back to the original intention when Biggs actually create and develop or maybe coin the constructive alignment, whereby we need to ensure that the students are being facilitated to construct their own meaning, which emphasize on the critical pedagogy that allow students to learn. All right, not just a technocratic tool. That is based on the term that the authors use, technocratic tool. It seems that the very technical and very robotic kind of tools just to make sure that everything on the checklist, tick, 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 something, without emphasizing, or maybe with less emphasizing on the ultimate aims or goal of constructive alignment, which is for students to construct their own meaning. Right? So I think this is I would say the original concept of constructive alignment and the original goals when it was coined in somewhere in 1990s. I think it is something that we need to come back to reflect. How can we, reclaim that constructive alignment purpose and put it in practice, right? So that is what the original concept, and then what is the current practices, and what something that we need to be aware when it comes to constructive alignment implementation, right? All right. So anyone, you can interrupt me anytime, anywhere. You just unmute and you can add on whatever point that you like to discuss. And then in terms of roles of learner in constructive alignment, all right, the original is basically central. Okay. So basically from the original concept, we can see clearly that learners is the central, that they are the one who should actively construct meaning through the activities that we design for them. All right, so it means that whatever the teaching and learning activities that we prepare for the students, it must elicit student engagement toward the intended learning outcomes, so that the students have opportunity, or maybe I would say enough opportunity for them to make sense of their learning, and hopefully they will be able to construct meaning throughout the activities that we plan for them. So this is where important elements in terms of what the learner's role in constructive. They are the main player. They are the ultimate goal, which is we want to make them engage with the learning activities so that they will be able to construct their own meaning, and that indicate how well they learn through our teaching learning activities. Right. So that is the original rules of learner in constructive alignments. But currently, all right, in the current practice, based on the author's perspective, so and even I also somehow agree to that, which is yes, in our current practice, we acknowledge the learners is the central point when it comes to our constructive alignment at this moment. However, all right, so I think this is something that from my observation it is quite, sometimes it's quite obvious. It's become more toward teacher-driven compliant with learning outcomes and checklists. Not really genuinely for the student's sake. I think somehow I do agree with the authors, and we need to reflect back whether when we practice the constructive alignment in our program, which one do we re-emphasize? Is it we want just to comply with the OBE and constructive alignment, or we really, we really understand that actually we are the one who designing the whole activities, right? The whole activities to ensure that the student engage with that, and then hopefully they will be able to make meaning from their own way of understanding which one. So I think this is something that is a bit challenging when it comes to the current practice, because I would say that there are certain educators really understand it and really make efforts to ensure that the student engage in teaching learning activities properly, so that the student have opportunities to construct the meaning. But maybe there are certain educators are just compliance to the needs of the current, or I will say current needs, or maybe current requirements. I think this is something that we have to decide. We have to decide which one should be the way, but definitely definitely it should go to the original purpose of constructive alignment, whereby the learners are the key central points, and whatever we design to attain whatever learning outcome that intended for the student must be able to engage students, and hopefully they will construct their meaning as evidence for learning of anything that they have to learn, right? So this is role of learner perspective, right? How about curriculum design? All right, in terms of curriculum design, where does this constructive alignments actually begins? All right, so in terms of curriculum design, as I mentioned just now, it looks like OBE. We need to begin with clear and high level outcomes. I mean that at that particular level of student. If first year, then we need to put the outcomes that related and relevant to the first year level, second year, third, and fourth year, so on and so forth. All right. So, and the most is important is high level outcome, mean that student must achieve that in order for them to consider as competent performances of understanding, right? So competent. You mean that there are certain level of uh, acceptable competency that would be the high level outcomes for that purpose, right? And in BIGS, original constructive alignment, they use solo taxonomy. We are using Bloom taxonomy, but there is another solo which is structured observed learning outcomes. So basically, they really want to measure something that is observable either from quantitative views or qualitative views. It depends. But the most important thing is they want to make sure the students learned from surface to deep level of learning. All right. So when it comes to the learning, so usually the deep level of learning is an indicator that the students already construct their own meaning. So this is something that in terms of curriculum design. So immediately we begin with the outcomes, and then the outcome must be high enough for a certain level of competency that required from the students. And the most important is emphasize on the deep learning of the subject matters. All right, so this is where the curriculum design. But if you're looking at the current practice, some critiques related to the outcome-based approaches seems to be a bit narrow. Why? Because we are more toward, I would say, based on the perspective is about text box curriculum design. Anything can take and then can measure is something. Sometimes it's more values put on the something measured rather than the meaningful learning that the student have to attain. I think this is something that from the author perspective, nowadays we are so much, I think, so much quantitative, I would say, rather than the whole meaning of the constructive alignment to make the students learn by developing their own meaning. That's why in the statement that privilege measurability over meaningful learning. I mean that we are more concerned about can we measure, and something not measure, we don't really look at it, or maybe difficult to measure, we don't really emphasize on that. This is something that maybe we need to reflect, and if there is the practice right now, we need to come back and go back to the original, I would say original intention of constructive alignment, right? And then in terms of teaching learning, definitely whatever we put in the teaching learning activity must be aligned with the learning outcomes, and that the student, any student should demonstrate the intended levels of understandings or maybe performance or even certain competency that required from them. And in constructive alignment, the original concept emphasized on the social learning as well, social plus individual. I mean that they not only rely on the lectures, but they are also engaged in different level of learning. I mean, for example, peer work, tutorials, reflections, independent study, and so on and so forth. Right? But at this moment, we observe that the the constructive alignment often being reduced to lectures or maybe activities which is very didactic and emphasize more toward exams. And sometimes, it's too technical, too robotic. Something is something that we need to reflect on our own. How can we go back to the original intention of constructive alignment, whereby the flexibility was emphasized because you need to be, not only on the classroom, but you can go even beyond the classroom. The context awareness related to the learning, this is where the authenticity come to the picture, and the critical reflections of pedagogy when we design our teaching learning activities. I think this is something that we are basically in Malaysia context, we are quite lucky because we have a lot of guidelines on how to make our teaching learning engaging and authentic in the way that will facilitate the student to engage and to attain. And they're also being provided with opportunity to demonstrate those skills in the real context. I think this is something very good in Malaysia at least, but as a whole, based on the author perspective, they observe that is reducing, in trend. But in Malaysia, I think we are getting more flexible actually. We are more, promoting authentic learning, more reflective and so on so forth. I think this is something that differences between region, maybe I would say, but at this moment we are quite, on the ground and very much related to the original intentions of constructive alignment when it comes to the teaching learning activities. And hopefully that we also understand this and try our best to make sure that whatever the teaching learning activities we design, will be able to facilitate the students' learning by constructing their own meaning, right? And in terms of assessment, all right, as usual, I think we are doing that, but maybe we need to emphasize more on how do we capture, the authentic, I would say, authentic outcomes that really on the performance, and using multiple assessments so that we know that when we trying to make judgment, not only depending on one assessment, but actually from the different from dimension of assessment. So our decision will be more authentic in terms of what are the student able to demonstrate, not just surface, but it's deeper and able to make sense of whatever they performs in the real world setting. All right, and then the current assessment practices under CA is more a kind of for the sake of doing things, managerial, restrictive, auditability, all this, rather than the authentic learning based on the observations by the authors. And I believe in our context, we are not in that direction. We are more toward authentic learning direction because we are trying our best to measure the ability of our students in a real context. For example, in medical, yes, I think we are quite sure that we are authentic in that way, but maybe in other courses or program, maybe there is something that we want to go back and reflect how actually we are assessing student in constructive alignment, perspective. All right, and the strength, definitely, I think I do not have to say that this is so obvious because a constructive alignment provide a systematic framework for us to design our curriculum, to make sure that the teaching learning activities will be able to support students and the student will be able to, attain whatever the intended learning outcomes, and hopefully whatever we assess something that is, that is indicating their learning ability and real performance. So this is where the promoting deep learning through the assessment. But at this moment, based on the authors, it seems that we are just, I would say, maybe more bureaucratic, because even though we always blame on the QA, but maybe our own understanding about the constructive alignments being misconcept, or maybe, and then that's why we when we implement, we are much more toward bureaucratic rather than empowering the practices that allow for students to take take the opportunity for them to create their own meaning. I would say, but things getting better because we are getting more understanding about constructive alignment, and hopefully the students will be the center of the of the focus, and hopefully whatever we do in our teaching, learning, and assessment will be able to allow them to demonstrate their potential. Limitation, I think, is something even big also if we are too prescriptive about what we have to do, and mechanical, definitely the CA will become a dictated method. I mean that we dictate method because of that. But if we go back to the original meaning of constructive alignment, it should be not detected, but there is a way that we can innovate method so that we can facilitate the students to make their own meaning when they are learning. And then, as I mentioned, there is more towards standardization, compliance, and managerialism in the way that somehow, whatever we practice is a way compared to the original intentions of the constructive alignment. And then there is something that overall message, yes, constructive alignment is influential, very useful framework, but we need to rethink about how do we implement it, in our own context, especially when we come to more complex higher education at this moment. All right. Now, that is the two views. All right. So now I would like to get your views, right? Based on your own experience or maybe your own observation, what is the critical point of view that you have about constructive alignment? So you can scan, because I want to see your point of view as well in terms of constructive alignment, and maybe that can be compared with what I already presented just now from the BIG's original perspective and the intention with the current practices elsewhere, and maybe you have your own practices and observation, and that can be shared here, right? So you can scan, and then if you have anything, you can write. And yes, Suriana, yes.
Prof, sorry for interrupting your activity ni. Actually, I have a question on
Hmm.
on the how to too. So basically, when you highlight tentang the concept of CA,
Hmm.
which is involve the students as the main the as the learners to create their own meaningful learning tu. Kalau amalan kita, so we have to sort of plan it out dulu. So what are the activities and an assessment before we even meet the students? So in this fact, so how do we go back to the concept?
Okay, so later on I will explain the diagram. Right?
Right. Okay, okay, sure. Thank you very
To
much.
just to recap all this concept based on the bits and the critics, or I would say perspective from our Login something later on. All right, I will put it in the diagram. Okay, so anyone like to share your critical point of view based on your experience observation about consultative alignment? I think if you have, you can write so that we can further discuss. And for Dr. Suriana question, I will address afterward because I have diagram for that. All right. So anyone would like to share your thoughts, your point of views about CA, the constructive alignment? Do you think right now is mechanical, or do you agree with the author's point of views? We are actually deviating from the original intention, or maybe you think that we are doing well because we have this, or maybe in your own practice whatsoever. You know, if you can share yours, that would be great. Teaching plan needs to well curated. All right. So yes, of course, definitely. But how to is another angle. Active two-way interaction. All right. Any more? Okay. How much the maximum percentage of self-reflection? I normally give 10 marks, or right. So that is your own reflection. I think that's very good. You incorporate the self-reflection because self-reflection will be able to, to make the students more reflective on their learning, and hopefully they know what they learned and why they learned, and hopefully that will increase their ability to make sense whatever they are learning. Table 4, all right, that's quite interesting. Table 4. Okay. Heavy demand places on instructors to design integrated learning. All right. Oh, that's quite interesting. Okay, any more? This is optional, I give another 1 minute for you to share if you have anything. Otherwise, I'm going to just put it in diagram because that's one is some words. It's a bit sometimes difficult to understand. All right, another 30 seconds. Anyone? Need to align with learning objective. So yeah, I think from the write up by Biggs, yes, they use learning objective. But from OBE perspective, we always use learning outcomes. All right. Definitely. All right. So thank you so much for sharing. Now, let me put into a diagram. All right. So basically, when we discuss about concept alignment, basically the central, as I mentioned just now, is learners construct meaning. So that is the ultimate aim of constructive alignments, right? And what purpose, what the ways that they need to go through, to construct meaning, and how do we know that they already construct the meaning? This is where the intended learning outcomes, right? Which is if from Biggs they use an objective, but from OBE perspective we use outcomes, right? Because focusing on the students' ability to do what at the end of learning session. And then we have teaching, learning, and activities, and we have assessment. And this is where we need to ensure that all the alignment happen. Because if anything happened in this alignment, we will miss something. For example, let's say if the intended learning outcome not clear enough, not explicit enough, and not at a particular level of intended not standards that will compromise what the students will be able to learn and to construct. And teaching and learning activity must be aligned as well with the intention of intended learning outcomes. We need to be, I would say, need to be systematic and meaningfully curate whatever the teaching learning activity so that we allowing the student to engage with that, and the assessment. If you're looking at the intended learning outcome, Big use solo, but we use a learning taxonomy. That is Bloom taxonomy, the cognitive, affective, psychomotor. And now I think they are moving toward knowledge, skill, and responsibility. But at this moment, in Malaysia, we are still using the CAP, the cognitive, effective, psychomotor as the intended learning outcomes. And then the teaching, learning activity, there are so many over there, and you can always refer to best practices on, for example, let's say if you want to teach them, certain intended outcome in your own field, for example, let's say clinical skill, so we need to expose them in clinical environment, for example. We need to use, for example, if you experiment, we need labs. If let's say they need the authentic learning experience when it comes to data collection in the field, we need a field work and so on and so forth. I think there's a lot of teaching learning activity that we can align with the intended learning outcome. And the assessment part at this moment, if you're looking at the current practice in our setting, we have the continuous assessment as part of the assessment. We have formative assessment to guide the students' learning, to promote learning and to reassure their learning, which is formative assessment. And we have final examination. Continuous assessment and final examination, we call and we lump under summative assessment. And then the others are supporting learnings, and then allowing the student to try it out before the real assessment. We always put it as formative assessment, right? And then when we relate with our course information, so there's something that from constructive alignment, right? This is a concept that we discussed, and now we relate to the course information. I believe that every one of us have experienced fill up the course information, and the course information, we have a different level of learning outcome, isn't it? So we have program learning outcomes, right? And then we have course learning outcome. Program learning outcomes will be a kind of guide for us to have our course learning outcome, because the course learning outcome will be able to support the students to achieve program learning outcomes later on. All right, so program learning outcome, PLOs, and then course learning outcomes. So what's different? Usually for program learning outcomes, it means that the students have to demonstrate whatever the ability or competency we spelled out under the program learning outcomes toward the end of the program. For example, let's say a medical program is 5 years. So it means that at the end of the 5 years, upon graduation, the student will be able to demonstrate all the PLOs. All right. For the course learning outcome, it means that the ability for them to demonstrate either cognitive, affective, or psychomotor at the end of the course. All right. So let's say your course is 6 weeks. At the end of the 6 weeks, the student should be able to demonstrate that learning outcomes that already expected from them to achieve, right? And then the course learning outcome is same back to teaching learning activities and assessment, right? And in terms of course information component, if you realize there's two things that's related to, I think very much related to constructive alignment. The course learning outcome and mapping of CLO to PLO, teaching method, and assessment method. So even though we have many other things, but within the course information components, this one I just use MQA as a reference, because the MQA have a 13 components for course information, but specifically on 7 and 8, so it's emphasized on the alignment between what we have discussed just now, the CLO, the learning outcomes, the teaching methods, and assessment methods. So it's already there in terms of in terms of the constructive alignment embedded within the course information. Okay. This is one of the examples. I think it is quite you are used to this one. This one I just want to demonstrate to you that there is CLO over there. This is just an example. So basically, this one CLO, and then there is a verbs over there. All right. So basically verbs, and there's certain condition and certain standards, for example. And if you notice that the C2, this is a learning taxonomy. All right. So it means that the cognitive, affective, and psychomotor, this is where the PLOs. And if we can reflect back based on the concept of constructive alignment, actually, we already doing that. All right, so we are trying our best to make sure that whatever the uh, uh, outcome being clearly mentioned, and with the focus of the student should be able to do what, all right, to explain, to evaluate, to prepare, to demonstrate in these examples. And then if you're looking at the technicality, all right, if you refer to the course information, and one of you mentioned about table 4 just now, maybe you are very familiar with table 4, but in any of course information, usually there are certain numbers of CLOs per course. All right. Why? Because we really need to be reasonable for the student to achieve certain number of competency within the allocated time. All right. Allocated. You mean that in our term, we use SLT, isn't it? Student learning time. So we must be reasonable enough to ensure that the student will be able to achieve the intended learning outcome within the stipulated duration of weeks, usually in weeks. Right? So the more the learning outcomes, I mean that the course learning outcome, logically, the more time students required for them to achieve those intended learning outcomes. So be careful when we put our learning outcome, because the nature of learning outcomes is about learning opportunity, and learning opportunity must require sufficient time for them to grow and develop those competencies. All right, so this is one example, and how we usually write our learning outcomes to make it clear, because remember, one of the things that being emphasized in constructive alignment is clear learning outcome. So we need to be very clear what is the verbs, something that action, and then what is the condition. It means that what the condition the student, the learner should be demonstrate that competency, and what the standard, at what level they need to be proficient enough. I mean that professional conduct, for example. This one is consulting clients and so on and so forth. All right, so these are how that constructive alignment being integrated into course information. All right. And then just to touch a little bit about program learning outcome, I know that everyone very used to this one. All right. So just let me focus on a little bit more on the learning outcomes. For NQF, we have this outcome. All right. And then usually for every program, they have their own program learning outcomes. So it means that the statement mentioning about what learners should know, should understand, maybe they should do upon the completion of study within a stipulated time, usually 4 to 5 years of study. And then this one, PO 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 until 11. But UPM, I think from my understanding at this moment, we are going to have PO 12 for the ESD, right? But for the NQF, it's only for 11 POs, I mean that 11 PLOs usually, but that is depend also on the professional needs. If you are professional about this program, I think that's sometimes required more than 11 PLOs, but most of the program will have 11 PLOs. And I just would like to highlight about the mapping of the learning outcome domain with the dominant learning domain. I mean that, for example, knowledge and understanding, the dominant learning domain will be the cognitive, the C1 to C6. All right, the cognitive skill, usually C3 and above, from applying to creating. Practical skill, dominant will be psychomotor. And the rest, for example, 4, 5, 6 also can, 8, 9, 10, 11 is more toward effective, because it's more toward so-called a soft skill. And then numeracy, more cognitive. Sometimes can be psychomotor as well. And digital skill can be any, cognitive, psychomotor, and affective. So basically, you can look at this guideline, this very useful guidelines. And then when we put our course learning outcome, we just put C2 and payload 1. But I think UPM put another a level, which is the soft skill, the third one. But that is okay because you can go beyond than only the basics requirement by any quality assurance body, all right? So now, this is something that, just to recap, this is C1 up to C6. I know that everyone already familiar, but in my context, for example, in the clinical, in the clinical context, we do have examples to guide ourselves when it comes to, a certain way of stating the clinical, the learning outcome. For example, if remembering what the actions verb, or maybe, and then what are the examples? For example, here is for the remembering, identify, and then understanding, explain, applying, use something, analyzing, categorize, evaluate, and design. I think this is something that, if you have this kind of guides for your own field, that will be very good, right? And similar to psychomotor, we have the domain, we have verb, we have the example of learning outcomes in our own context, so that it's clearer and we know exactly where to pitch when it comes to the assessment later on. This one is effective, and this one also examples that we use in our context in the medical, right? All right, so this is a course information, constructive alignment. And if you notice, another one is this one. Even though it's not directly related to constructive alignment, but it's contribute to the attainment of the outcome. Remember, when it comes to the constructive alignment, the main aim is to allow students to construct their own meaning. And to construct their own meaning takes time. And that's why there's another important element that we need to consider is about the student learning time, or we call it, in our term is credit value, which is equivalent to the student workload, because sufficient time is required for student to develop the competency. So this one basically is related to SLT, and if you're looking at definition by MQA, so it's about the learning volume of the academic load to achieve the learning outcomes. All right, so it means that how much time we provide to the students so that the students will have opportunity to practice, to do something, or to experience it, so that they can achieve the learning outcome that we set as educator, or maybe the standard set, right? And in terms of student workload, which is the SLT, right? So that we have, if you notice that in our calculations of credit, we depend on SLT. We have a contact hours. We also have independent work. In contact hours, independent work. It means that they self-study, learning without teacher. Right? And assessment also, we have the independent work for them, immediate preparation time for assessment, as well as the contact hours for the assessment, immediate assessment time, the final exams, the students demonstrate something to us, and then we make judgment. So basically, this is also interrelated with the constructive alignment as a whole. All right. So, and if you put in this diagram, basically what we see actually the contact hours, because the students spend their time with us as a teacher, and then at a certain point we will assess whatever they're able to do in front of us, or maybe they submit learning evidence in many form. But other than the contact hour, there is independent work. It means that the students spend so much time outside the schedule, or maybe without teacher, for them to attain the learning outcome, do revision, do assignment, prepare for something, or maybe they are doing something is beyond than what is required, just to make sure that they have what it takes to attain the learning outcome. So this is something that we really need to take care as well in constructive alignment, and in our term, we put it in credit value. All right. And if I just want to visualize the competency and time, so basically, all right, so this is student. Remember, the student come to us, usually they are considered as incompetent. And then gradually they will become a novice, then competent, or maybe they are advanced at the end, maybe mastery of whatever they learned. All right. And then in this diagram, time is very important because it's I would say, key resources for students, because time will make them, will make them able to apply whatever they have learned, and then that will provide opportunity for them to learn, so that when they have all this opportunity, hopefully they will have time to learn and then to attain whatever the learning outcomes or maybe the competency that we expected from them. So time and competency is very important. We really need to ensure that we estimate, I would say estimation is not that 100% correct, but estimation of what all the students need to attain in terms of time to attain the learning outcome. I think it's very important, even though it's not emphasized directly in the constructive alignment, but when it comes to allowing sufficient time for the student to construct the meaning and attain the learning outcome, that is where the SLT become important, right? And if you notice that in the MQA, there are certain guidelines on how you estimate the SLT, but I'm not going to talk about the SLT anymore, but just to show you that the SLT matters, all right? So do matters to us, to the students, because SLT key resources as it offers opportunity for students to grow their competency, and at the end, we verified whether the student already achieved or not achieved the learning outcomes through the assessment, right? And then just to highlight, in our context, Malaysia context, 1 credit unit equal to 40 hours of national SLT. And then, as I mentioned just now, there are two main components about teaching learning activities and the assessment activities, both sides. Right. So this is the whole thing about the constructive alignment, and hopefully that we can relate to our practice and why the constructive alignment is so influential, important in our context, especially in OBE, because as I mentioned, constructive alignment will provide us a systematic framework, and then a framework that allow the student at the central point as a focus, and then we as educators as a designer for the learning to happen. And hopefully we will provide them with a profound learning experience, and then with that profound learning experience, they can develop the expected competency based on the program learning outcome that we already set, the course learning outcome that we have set, and hopefully the next level will be 3 to 5 years later on, they will achieve what we call it program educational objective, because there is another level of outcome, which is a program education objective, which is we hope that to see them to achieve that 3 to 5 years after they graduated from our program. So the whole thing, all right? So maybe in summary, before we start some sort of discussion, so I would say that one is constructive alignment allows learners to construct meaning. So that is the fundamental, all right? So basically this constructive alignment. And then constructive alignment should somehow enhance our teaching practices so that our teaching and learning activities that we prepare for the students will engage them with the subject matters, and the student will learn through it effectively. And then last but not least, constructive alignment should empower student-centered learnings more than teacher-centered learning, all right, especially in this complex higher education context. So with that summary, maybe I open up to any discussion, or maybe I pass over the floor to our chief barista to lead the discussion, maybe. Yeah, go ahead.
All right, thank you very much, Prof. Saiful. So now, so is there any questions or any points of view that you would like to, to voice it out? Anything?
Anything?
So, berbalik kepada soalan saya tadi tu, Prof, mungkin tentang I think today when you talk about the real concept, the original concept, dia macam satu tamparan yang besar lah bagi kita semua sebenarnya. I think, but at least for me, because I think most of us do not know, tentang all this. So we don't have enough pengetahuan, and how we do it is as you said, merely as the checklist or compliance to quality assurance. Because our background is not education. So with you today as the speaker or as the penceramah, so really help us a lot in understanding that. So the concept about so the center point is as students. The center point of teaching and learning is the student, and how do we then involve them in the in creating the meaningful learning journey in the course. Mungkin boleh Prof bagi examples ke?
Okay.
Tentang ini?
For example, all right. For example, maybe I give example from my own observation. Observation. For example, right now, let's say we want students to be able to carry out their professional roles, at the end of the program, for example. All right, and then we have several courses, right? Several courses that intended and designed to support the student to attain those ultimate responsibility. So how do we approach that? All right. So how do we approach that from my perspective and my own observation as well? First, I think we need to be very clear with their future roles and responsibilities in our own field. Let me give an example in medical. For example, let's say on day one, of graduation, they are expected to play a role as a junior doctors, right? So a junior doctors. What does a junior doctors do? When on the first day they have to take care of patient, for example. They have to make sure that the diagnosis very at least accurate, and then they have to perform clinical procedures. So if that is the kind of responsibility, now we need to come back to the course from year 1 until year 5. How do we design our program so that toward the end we support them? For example, let's say we need a kind of clinical procedures. So what sort of this one intended learning outcome is basically the student the students to demonstrate effective, for example, clinical examinations. Okay, clinical physical examination. So that will be the intended learning outcomes. Very clear. And then how do we put the teaching learning activity so that the student can construct their own meaning in terms of a skill? So usually we have a clinical skill simulation center that allow the student to practice and to try all the procedure required for them to perform the clinical examination. So that is simulation, for example, here. So it means that the teaching learning activities, the best based on current evidence is in the preclinical, for example, before they go to clinical and clerk the real patient, is in the simulation center. And then how do we assess? We assess through the simulation as well. So basically, these are the example that how we do it when we know exactly their the expected competency from a junior doctor just now. So I think that is something that maybe we need to to put how the students will engage with that teaching learning activities, because student is the center in constructive alignment. Then we design accordingly so that the students will be able to have opportunity to demonstrate, because our learning outcome is to demonstrate, isn't it? So we need to think what opportunities in our teaching learning session that allow students to try to demonstrate those particular skills. And at the end, we assess them using the same, I would say, setting, but for the sake of evaluation and assessment, because we want to verify students able or not able to do as what is expected at the end. But the student already given ample, or I would say reasonable opportunities for them to practice on, at least at simulation level, before we ask them. So there's an example that from the responsibility come to our learning outcomes in the course level, and then because we want to engage, we think about the teaching learning activities, what is the best one for them to, to have opportunity, and then assessment. That I think that's quite simple, but that means that the constructive alignment when it comes to the original concepts from the inceptions of of this concept. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's clear, Prof. So maknanya juga, so when we, start our class or our program even, we need to convey to the students what are the learning outcomes. Mula-mula lagi. Kadang-kadang, kita lupa ataupun kita ingat kita untuk kelas kita, okay, kita nak ajar-ajar ini. But we forgot to convey, kan? Learning
Yeah.
outcome apa, what are the skills they need at the end of it to master or to learn, kan, at the end of the course. Yeah.
Sama juga macam apa, kalau saya tengok cikgu kan, nak jadi cikgu tak senang sebenarnya. Contoh kita lah sebagai educator, kita ada tak pernah di-train untuk jadi educator?
Tak ada. Sebab tu kita attend course hari ni.
Sama lah, kalau kita tak ada that peluang, definitely lah expected lah kita macam tak tahu kan. Tapi dalam konteks yang pelajar ni pun macam tu jugalah, kalau kita tak diberikan peluang untuk untuk cuba lakukan sesuatu berdasarkan learning outcome yang kita tetapkan tu, jadi macam kita lah, kita expected kita mengajar, betul tak? Tapi at the end tak pernah pun dalam sepanjang kita buat master PhD tu ada this learning outcome yang melatih kita untuk mengajar, betul tak? Kita dilatih untuk jadi saintis, adalah, ataupun expert content. Sebab tu bila kita diberi tugas tu, kita kena datang macam ni lah untuk update. Tapi untuk pelajar, dia tak ada that kind of peluang, sebab nanti bila dia keluar je dia nak kerja lah.
Betul.
Kan? So maksudnya kalau dalam bidang kita, kalau kita boleh fikirkan sebenarnya kan pelajar kita ni bila dia keluar dia nak jadi apa sebenarnya, apa tanggungjawab dia, apa peranan dia dalam dalam area yang dia nak involve, supaya kita sebagai pendidik ataupun cikgu ni, kita boleh tengok macam mana kita nak sesuaikan that kepada level, sama ada kepada program learning outcome kita ataupun kepada kita punya course learning outcome. Sebab tujuan kita adalah nak membantu pelajar ni untuk belajar dalam dengan kekuatan dia, dan dia belajar sebab dia faham dengan dia punya kefahaman, bukannya kita impose kefahaman.
Right.
Definitely kalau kita fikir macam tu kan, kita kena fikir macam mana aku nak ajar budak ni supaya ada peluang untuk dia engage dengan apa dia belajar ni. It's not easy tau nak buat benda tu. I must say it's not easy.
Setuju. Prof, tadi sebenarnya saya suka bila Prof coinkan the term learning outcome tu kepada learning opportunities. So
Hmm.
bila Prof sebut macam tu kan, oh yeah, so that is macam lebih positive connotation kan. So
Ya.
that the student sendiri yang ambil responsibility, tanggungjawab untuk peluang dia untuk belajar kan.
Ya.
Dan kita facilitate saja.
Ya.
Right.
Sebab tu kalau kita tengok sekarang ni, kalau perasan lah, sekarang ni dah banyak KPT pun duk selalu sebut sebagai kitanya learning facilitator kan. Dan kita patutnya bagi learning experience kepada pelajar, betul tak? Kan banyak term-term macam ni dah keluar. Ini disebabkan oleh dia tahu at the end of the day kan, it's not about the educator, it's
Right.
about the learners.
Uh-uh. Okey Prof, sebenarnya kita ni dah lebih masa
Oh,
sangat di 15 minit dah, 16
oh,
minit.
alright, sorry,
So,
sorry.
ya, kita ni I think the topic on constructive alignment ni sangat menarik kan, especially bila macam Prof kata kita perlu belajar dalam konteks yang betul dan lebih baik kan daripada pakarnya dalam bidang education ni. So I think this is a good opportunities for all of us lecturers today to learn from you. I think I'm sure that all agrees that topik constructive alignment ni kalau ada masa lagi panjang lebih sesuai, betul tak? So today I think nanti mungkin CADe-Lead boleh aturkan kursus-kursus ataupun bengkel-bengkel yang berkaitan yang lebih hands-on dan sebagainya untuk sesi constructive alignment ni nanti. Dan kita memang I think CADe-Lead perlu jemput lagi Prof Saiful untuk sesi ini. Alright.
Saya share slide ni untuk rujukan semua. Mungkin lepas ni mungkin berminat nak tanya soalan dan sebagainya bolehlah. Mungkin
Right.
masa ni terhad sangat kan. Saya pun duduk kalut juga tadi nak explain banyak benda.
Betul, betul. So, Alhamdulillah, thank you very much, Prof. Saiful, and to all lecturers today. Our hope is, we can all deepen our understanding on constructive alignment, and we carry this spirit forward into the new semester, right? With renewed energy, optimism, and a stronger commitment to student-centered learning. So thank you once again, Prof. Saiful, and to all participants for being with us today. And we look forward to seeing you again in the next ChocOBErry Smoothie session in the future. Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay,
Bye.